ballroom fell silent the moment she walked in behind him. Her ex stood at the head table, his bride watching every face turn. She had not come to beg. What makes a man fear the woman he once discarded? The envelope arrived while Maggie was pinning lace around another woman's waist. She had 3 shins between her lips, 3 silver knobs, one hand steadying the bride's train, the other smoothing a seam that had refused to sit flat. The old shop was quiet, except for the soft scrape of hangers and the low hum of the ceiling fan. In the mirror, the bride turned from side to side, worried about a fold no one else would ever notice. Maggie noticed it. He always did. "A little more here," the bride said, touching her hip. "I don't want it to pull." "It won't," Maggie said, taking the pins from her mouth one by one. "You should be able to breathe on your wedding day." The bride laughed, relieved. Maggie smiled back because that was part of the work too. Not pretending a woman was perfect. Helping her believe she did not need to be fixed before she was loved. The bell over the front door gave a tired little ring. A cream envelope slid through the mail slot and landed on the worn wood floor, face up, like it had been placed there by a careful hand. He saw the raised lettering before she saw the name. Thick paper, elegant, script. The kind of invitation people ordered when they wanted the envelope itself to announce that money had been spent. "Visit friend." She bent to pick it up. After the bride stepped down from the fitting platform, the bride's mother glanced at the envelope and made the polite little sound Southern women made when they recognized expensive stationery. "Looks important." Maggie tucked it behind the appointment book. Probably just another vendor. Her fingers stayed on it too long. She finished the fitting. She marked the hem. She wrote the balance due in the ledger in Ruth Whittaker's careful old system. The columns her grandmother had used for decades. Deposit, alterations, final pickup. Maggie still wrote it by hand first, even though a tablet sat on the counter beside her. Ruth had believed paper remembered things people tried to forget. When the bride and her mother left, the shop settled back into itself. Rows of gowns hung in soft white shadows. Front window caught the weak afternoon light. On the wall behind the counter, the small brass sign still read Ruth Whittaker Bridal Alterations. Though Ruth had been gone long enough for people to begin calling it Maggie's place, Maggie reached for the envelope. Her name was written in full. Maggie Whittaker, not Miss Whittaker, not Maggie. Formal enough to keep its distance. She opened it with the tip of her seam ripper. The card inside was heavy, the lettering dark and clean. Preston, Hale, and Caroline. Price. Request the pleasure of your company as they celebrate their marriage. For a moment, room did not move. Maggie read the line again, though she had understood it the first time. Preston, Caroline. A wedding, not an engagement party, not some future plan she could ignore. The man who had once stood in this very shop and told Ruth he would take care of Maggie was marrying not just someone else, Caroline Price. With her country club smile, her charity luncheon posture, and the kind of family name that made bankers return calls before breakfast. Maggie set the card on the counter. Her hands went automatically to the unfinished hem beside her, as if a seam could give her something solid to hold, but not shouted when he ended it. That had been the worst part. He had been calm, careful, almost kind. He told her she was talented, told her he admired her strength, filled her. Told her she deserved someone who fit the life she wanted. Then, with that same clean voice, he said he needed a wife who fit the life he was building. He had not said she was too full in the hips for his world. Said she was too plain. Beside women who played tennis in pearls and never looked warm under the sun, he did not have to. Preston had been raised by Evelyn Hale. Evelyn had made an art of cutting. Without leaving fingerprints, Maggie picked up the invitation again. Beneath the card was a smaller note, written in a neat hand she recognized at once. "Hope you'll be gracious enough to attend." It would mean so much to Preston. No signature. None was needed, Evelyn. Maggie folded the note once, then again, pressing the crease until the paper sharpened beneath her thumb. For one hot second, she wanted to tear the whole thing into pieces and drop it into the wastebasket with loose threads and broken beads. Instead, she slid it back into the envelope. That was what they expected from her. Quiet wound. A closed door. A woman ashamed enough to disappear. She carried the invitation to the back room. Ruth's old storage corner smelled faintly of cedar, dust, and fabric starch. Boxes lined the shelves in careful rows, each labeled in her grandmother's looping hand. Veils, receipts, beadwork, tax papers. Maggie had been meaning to sort through all of it for months, but every time she opened a box, she found some small proof that Ruth had once touched it. And the task became too heavy. She placed the wedding invitation on the work table and stood there, breathing through the sting in her throat. "No," she said softly, though there was no one in the room to answer. She would not cry over Preston's invitation in Ruth's shop. Not here. Not between the walls her grandmother had paid for one alteration at a time. She reached for the old tin box of thread she kept on the lower shelf. It was not where she expected it to be. Someone had shifted it behind. A stack of file folders tied with ribbon. She frowned. Ruth had been particular about order. Needles in the top drawer, silk thread in the blue tin, business papers in the green file box. If something was out of place, there had been a reason. Maggie pulled the folders free. Few loose papers slid out and scattered across the table. She gathered them quickly, then stopped. One page bore the name of the shop's building, or showed a transfer form she vaguely remembered seeing during the months after Ruth passed. At the time, she had been grieving behind on rent and embarrassed by how little she understood about property language. Eveline had offered to have someone look over things, and Preston had told Maggie not to worry herself sick over paperwork. The memory made her stomach tighten. She untied the ribbon and spread the pages under the yellow desk lamp. Ruth's original copy sat beneath a newer document, the paper smoother, the print cleaner. Both referred to the same property. He carried Ruth Whitaker's name, but the signatures were not the same. On the older page, Ruth's hand was unmistakable. Firm, slanted slightly forward, the W in Whitaker opening wide like a stitched loop. He had seen that signature on checks, birthday cards, shop orders, and little notes tucked into pattern books. On the newer page, the letters tried to imitate it. Tried and failed. The W was too narrow. Final R dragged down instead of lifting. Whoever had written it knew what Ruth's signature looked like, but they did not know the rhythm of her hand. Maggie's first thought was not anger. It was shame. She had seen that newer paper before. She remembered holding it after the funeral, remembered Preston beside her, telling her it was standard language, remembered Evelyn's soft voice, saying Ruth would have wanted Maggie protected from all that legal fuss. Maggie had nodded because she was tired, because she trusted the wrong people, because part of her had been afraid that asking questions would make her look foolish. Now, the two signatures lay side by side on Ruth's work table. The wedding invitation sat above them, bright and cruel. Maggie pulled the lamp closer. The pool of light tightened around the papers, shutting out the rest of the room. For the first time all afternoon, the ache in her chest changed shape. It was no longer only the pain of being replaced. It was colder than that. Sharper, she reached into the tin box and found what Ruth had hidden beneath the spools. A folded copy of the original deed, in tissue and tied with black thread. Maggie opened it slowly. There, at the bottom, was Ruth's true signature again. Strong, certain, alive in the only way paper could keep someone alive. He placed the deed beside the newer transfer form. 3 signatures, 2 true, 1 wrong. Outside the shop, a car passed over the wet street with a soft hiss. In the front room, the wedding gowns waited in their plastic covers, pale and patient. Maggie stared at the false signature until her hands stopped shaking. Someone had touched Ruth's papers. Someone had touched the shop. And whoever it was had expected Maggie to be too heartbroken to notice. By morning, the 3 signatures had stopped looking like ink and started looking like a warning. Maggie had barely slept. She had left Ruth's papers on the back work table, seated beneath a pincushion so the old deed would not curl at the edges. The wedding invitation sat beside them, its cream paper too bright against the scarred wood. Every time she passed it, Fischl felt the same twist in her stomach. But she did not put it away. Not yet. The shop opened at 9, though Maggie unlocked the front door a little before then. She swept the fitting platform, checked the appointment book, rehung a row of gowns that did not need rehanging. Her hands wanted work. Her mind wanted answers. At 9:30, the bell over the door rang. Maggie looked up, expecting a bride, a mother, or one of the delivery men from the dry cleaners. Instead, Dante Riva stood just inside the threshold, filling the quiet front room with a kind of stillness that did not belong among lace sleeves and pearl buttons. He wore a dark jacket, no tie, and an expression that gave away very little. His hands were bare. Maggie noticed the tattoos before she could stop herself. He also noticed that he waited near the door instead of walking deeper into the shop, as if he understood that this place was not his to claim. "Maggie," he said. "Mr. Rivas, Dante is fine." She did not answer that right away. His eyes moved once around the room, landing on the brass sign behind the counter. "I came about my mother's dress." The tension in Maggie's shoulders shifted, not gone, but less sharp. She remembered the dress, the satin, old-fashioned buttons, lace that had yellowed at the cuffs. His mother had wanted it cleaned and repaired, not for a wedding, because it was the last beautiful thing she had from the life before illness had made her house too small. "It's wrapped in the back," Maggie said. "I finished the sleeve yesterday." Dante nodded. He said, "You treated it like it mattered." It did matter. His gaze returned to her face. "That's what she said too." Maggie went still. A simple compliment should not have touched her so quickly. For Preston and Evelyn, and that invitation, kindness felt suspicious before it felt safe. She turned toward the back room. "I'll get it." The papers were still on the work table. Dante followed only as far as the doorway. His eyes caught the spread of documents before Maggie could gather them. The old deed, the newer transfer form, Ruth's signatures, the invitation. He saw him take in the order of things with a silence that made her feel suddenly exposed. "It's nothing," she said too quickly. Dante did not move closer. "That doesn't look like nothing." He slid the deed beneath the top sheet. "It's a family matter." "Then I won't ask." That should have ended it. Any polite man would have taken the dress, paid his bill, and left her to the ruin of her own questions. They stayed in the doorway, quiet and heavy as a locked gate. Maggie hated that part of her, wanted to tell him. She took his mother's dress from the garment rack and carried it out, wrapped in muslin. He accepted it with both hands, careful in a way that did not match his hard face. "My mother will be grateful," he said. "I hope she likes it." "She will." He looked past her again, not at the invitation, at the papers beneath her palm. "You look like someone who found a loose thread and is afraid the whole seam is going to come apart." Maggie almost laughed. It came out thin and tired. That obvious? Someone who knows seams, maybe not. To someone who knows fear, yes. The word made her stiffen. Dante noticed. He lowered his voice. "I'm not here to push." Maggie looked down at the documents. "Found a signature that doesn't look like my grandmother's." Dante said nothing, and because he said nothing, she kept going. "It's on a transfer form tied to this building. I saw the paper once after she passed, but I was been thinking clearly. Preston told me it was standard. His mother said someone had looked over it." She stopped before the bitterness could spill too far. "Now I'm looking at it next to Ruth's original deed, and it's wrong." His jaw tightened, but he did not perform outrage. He did not make promises about making anyone pay. He set the garment bag carefully across the nearest chair and pointed, not touching the papers. "Do you have copies?" "Some. Know if they're the right ones." "Then you don't need a man with an opinion," he said. "You need a land lawyer." Maggie watched him, searching for the trap. "I can find one myself. I believe you." He reached into his jacket and placed a plain card on the table. "No flourish, no pressure. But this one owes me a favor and knows old property records better than most. You can call from your own phone. Feel you can meet him without me." She read the card. It was simple, understated, with only a name, a number, and an office address downtown. Somehow that made it more unsettling. Why would you help me? His answer came after a beat. Because my mother came home from this shop and cried over a sleeve you repaired. Not because it was pretty. Because you made her feel like she had not disappeared. Thea's eyes rested on Ruth's sign again. People who do that should not have their doors taken from them quietly. Maggie looked away first. She wanted to refuse. Pride rose in her like a locked hand. She did not want to become another woman, waiting for a powerful man to decide what she was worth. But the papers on the table did not care about pride. If someone had forged Ruth's hand, he needed more than anger and a good eye for stitching. I go with you only if this stays legal, she said. A faint change touched Dante's expression. Not quite a smile. That was going to be my condition. Fier's office downtown had no softness in it. No flowers, no framed inspirational phrases, no velvet chairs for nervous clients. Just a long table, shelves of thick binders, and a window that looked out over a row of old brick buildings that had survived more ambition than anyone could count. The lawyer listened without interrupting. He laid Ruth's original deed beside the newer transfer form and studied both signatures with a magnifying glass he took from a drawer. Maggie sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Dante stood near the wall, saying nothing unless asked. You were right to bring the older copy, the lawyer said at last. But I'd want the county records before I said anything more. Maggie swallowed. So it could still be nothing, down. It could be a clerical mess, he said. It could be worse. The difference mattered. By early afternoon, they were in the county records room with a retired clerk whose caution showed in every movement. He did not welcome them warmly. She looked at the papers, then at Maggie, then at Dante, and made it clear she was not there to bend rules for anyone. Old files don't like being rushed, she said. I'm not asking you to rush, he replied. I'm asking you to help me understand what happened to my grandmother's shop. That softened something. Not much enough. They waited while boxes were brought out and logs were checked. Maggie watched dates, stamps, and property descriptions line up like pieces of a pattern she did not yet know how to cut. The clerk pulled one folder, then another. The lawyer asked careful questions. Dante remained a quiet presence behind her, far enough to steady the room, far enough not to own it. At last, the lawyer placed Ruth's copy beside a county record and frowned. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was professional. He felt it before anyone said a word. The lawyer tapped the old deed once, then the newer filing. If this copy your grandmother kept is authentic, he said, then that wedding may not just be a wedding, you. Deed stayed in the records room long after the lawyer stopped speaking. Maggie did not answer him. She looked from Ruth's old deed to the newer filing, then to the stack of county papers now spread across the table. Room smelled of dust, old cardboard, and toner. Somewhere beyond the wall, a phone rang twice and went quiet, but no one at the table moved. Dante stood behind her chair with his arms folded, watching the lawyer, the papers. He had the stillness of a man waiting for a door to open before deciding whether to step through it. Maggie touched the edge of Ruth's copy. What does that mean? The lawyer did not rush. He turned one page, then another. It means this transfer form may be tied to more than your shop. The retired clerk pulled another folder from the cart and laid it beside the first. Same block, she said. Same filing chain. He leaned forward. The papers were dry, ordinary things. Stamps, parcel descriptions, scanned signatures, old ownership notes. Nothing about them looked cruel. That made it worse. A person could lose half her life inside language this plain. The lawyer placed a yellow marker near the first document. This is your grandmother's property record. He placed a second marker lower on the page. This is a neighboring building. Then another. And another. By the fifth marker, Maggie stopped breathing evenly. They were collecting the whole row for, she said. The lawyer looked at her. Someone was trying to. Faye's voice came low from behind her. The Hales? The lawyer did not say yes right away. He pulled another sheet from the file and turned it toward them. On it was a draft plan for redevelopment. Not a final contract, public announcement. Just enough to show intention. A row of small old storefronts marked for consolidation. A projected retail space. A polished sketch of what the block might become once the older tenants were gone. He stared at the place where Ruth's shop should have been. On the paper, it was not a bridal alterations shop. It was not the front window where nervous brides turned in front of a mirror. The back room where Ruth had stored thread by color and receipts by year. It was a blank square waiting to be absorbed. Dant stepped closer. Who benefits? The lawyer drew one more paper from the folder. A local development group, connected to the Hale family, has been positioning itself around this block for some time. Quietly, not illegal by itself, he tapped the newer filing. But if this signature is not authentic, then this piece of the chain becomes a problem. Maggie looked at Ruth's name again. Her grandmother had not written that false signature. Maggie knew it the way she knew the pull of silk under a needle. Stranger could imitate the shape of a stitch, but not the hand that made it. Preston knew, she said. No one asked her how she knew. The certainty had arrived too cleanly. The lawyer folded his hands. We cannot prove what he knew from this alone. No, Maggie said, but he was there when I first saw that paper. After Ruth passed. He told me not to worry over legal language. His mother said someone had already looked it over. His jaw tightened. The clerk, who had been careful not to give opinions, slid another printout across the table. There was also a financing note attached to the redevelopment file. Not a deed, not a contract. For reference, Maggie read it once and did not understand. She read it again, slower. Price. Her mouth went dry. Caroline's family. The name did not accuse anyone by itself. It did not say Caroline knew. Say Preston had chosen her, like a banker choosing collateral. But the paper made a shape Maggie could no longer pretend to see. Preston had not simply traded one woman for another. He had traded access for money, for status, an old promise for a block of buildings he could point to and call vision. The room tilted slightly, and Maggie pressed her palm flat against the table. Dante noticed. Sit back. I am sitting. Then breathe. He almost snapped at him, but the anger had nowhere clean to go. It was not the hot humiliation she had felt when the invitation arrived. It was cold. It was colder, older. It moved through her like water under a locked door. He had spent months thinking Preston had been ashamed of her body, her shop, her ordinary life. That had hurt enough. But now she saw the uglier part. Her life had also been in his way. The lawyer gathered the key papers into a clean stack. This does not give us a victory today. It gives us a path. We need certified copies. We need a handwriting review. And if there is an event where this redevelopment is being presented or supported, we need to know. When? Maggie looked up. An event? He nodded. Deals like this do not move on paper alone. They move when people gather in nice rooms and agree to believe the same story. Dante's eyes shifted to her face. Maggie knew before either man said it. The wedding. By late afternoon, they were back in the lawyer's office downtown. The older files lay beside fresh copies, each page clipped and marked. The lawyer drafted a request to pause any pending action tied to Ruth's property until the signature could be reviewed. It was not a grand weapon. It was not revenge. The not sound. It was a narrow legal door left open just enough for Maggie to push her foot through. Do not think of this as stopping everything, the lawyer said. Think of it as preventing them from saying no one objected. Maggie nodded. They had been quiet for most of the afternoon. He stood near the window now, looking down at the street below. His reflection in the glass seemed darker than the room itself. You don't have to go there tonight, he said. He looked at the draft in front of her. If I don't? The lawyer can file. Notices can be sent. But Preston will stand in that ballroom, she said, with Caroline's family, his mother, every person who thinks my grandmother's shop is just an old building in the way. Dante turned. Maggie picked up the wedding invitation from her bag. She had brought it without deciding why. Now she knew they sent this because they thought it would make me disappear, she said. Maybe that was the point. If I stayed home ashamed, they could smile through dinner and talk about new beginnings. The lawyer did not soften his voice. If you go, you must stay calm. No accusations you cannot support. No scene that lets them make you the problem. Maggie almost smiled. They already made me the problem. No, Dante said. They made you the loose thread. Phrase landed between them. Maggie looked at the marked page, then at the draft order, then at Ruth's signature copied clean and strong on the older deed. For the first time since the invitation arrived, she was not looking for a place to hide her hurt. She was looking for the right place to put it. As evening settled over Savannah, Dante drove her past the old hotel, where the reception was being prepared. These glowed behind tall windows. Florists moved through the side entrance with white arrangements. A valet stand had been set near the front steps. The building looked polished, expensive, certain of itself. Thea sat in the passenger seat with the file on her lap. Through the glass doors, she could see a sign being carried inside, the kind used for donor boards and project announcements. She did not need to read every word. Finn's name was there. The Hale name was there. So was the promise of redevelopment. Her fingers tightened around Ruth's papers. Dante parked at the curb, but did not turn off the engine. Your choice, he said. Maggie watched the hotel doors open and close around people who had never once been asked to prove they belonged. Then she looked down at the draft order in the file and understood exactly what Preston planned to do that night. He was going to use his wedding the future of the block that held Ruth's shop. And Maggie had to decide whether she was willing to walk into the room that had already thrown her out. The hotel doors opened before Maggie could change her mind. Dante did not touch her arm until she offered it. That mattered. He stood beside her in his dark suit, silent and steady. He tightened her fingers around the file tucked against her ribs. Inside it were Ruth's old deed, the marked copies from the records room, and the order the lawyer had prepared before sunset. Thin pages, plain words, fierce. The only shield Maggie had ever brought to a wedding. The ballroom was already full. Music floated over the clink of glasses and the low, polished laughter of people who had known each other through church luncheons, charity boards, and country club dinners for years. White flowers stood in tall arrangements along the tables. At the far end of the room, near the head table, Preston was speaking to an older man in a dinner jacket, smiling. The careful smile he used when money was nearby. Carolyn sat beside him, beautiful and composed, her wedding dress spread around her like proof of victory. Then Maggie stepped in. First silence came from the nearest tables. It moved outward, soft but fast, until conversation thinned across the ballroom. A woman lifted her hand to her necklace. Fan, halfway through a toast, lowered his glass without drinking. Faces turned, one after another, and Maggie felt the old reflex rise in her body, the urge to make herself smaller, to apologize for taking up space. She did not. They walked at her pace, not ahead of her. The file stayed in Maggie's hand. Her chin stayed level. Preston saw her when they were halfway across the room. His smile faltered. For one brief second, he looked almost relieved. He thought she had come to grieve in public, to beg him for an explanation, to prove every small thing he had said about her needing to let go. Then he saw Dante. The relief vanished. Carolyn followed Preston's stare. Their expression tightened first, with offense, then confusion. She looked Maggie up and down, then looked at Dante, then at the file in Maggie's hand. Evelyn rose from her seat at the head table with a smoothness that would have impressed anyone who did not know better. Maggie, Evelyn said, her voice carrying just enough sweetness to be heard. This is hardly the time. He stopped at the edge of the head table. The whole room watched her breathe. You're right, Maggie said. It's not the time for old feelings. Preston stepped forward quickly. Maggie, whatever you think you're doing, here for you, she said. The words landed harder than if she had shouted them. Dante remained a half step behind her, his eyes on the room, not on Preston. He did not threaten. He did not speak. His silence, space, for Maggie to stand inside her own decision. The lawyer moved from a side entrance, carrying his own folder. A few people turned toward him, and the mood in the ballroom changed again. It was no longer gossip. It was calculation. Evelyn's polite mask slipped at the edges. Who is this man? Counsel for Miss Whitaker, the lawyer said. I'll be brief. Preston's face drained of warmth. This is a private event, he does. Became less private, the lawyer replied, when materials connected to a redevelopment proposal were brought into discussion among interested parties tonight. A murmur went through the room. Caroline looked at Preston. Redevelopment? He did not answer fast enough. The lawyer opened his folder and placed the order on the table in front of the family. Maggie watched Evelyn's eyes drop to the page. The older woman recognized the danger before anyone else did. This is a temporary hold on any transaction involving the Whitaker property until questions surrounding a disputed signature are reviewed, the lawyer said. We also have certified copies indicating irregularities in the filing chain. Evelyn's hand closed around the back of her chair. That is a misunderstanding. No, Maggie said, and this time her voice did not shake. The misunderstanding is when someone reads a hemline wrong. This was my grandmother's name. She opened the file and placed Ruth's true signature beside the newer transfer form. The papers were not dramatic. They did not need to be. For the chandelier light, the difference was plain enough for those closest to see. Karen stood. What is she talking about? Preston. Preston's eyes moved over the papers, then over the watching guests, toward the older men seated 2 tables away. Investors, Maggie guessed. Men who had been promised clean ownership, easy consolidation, a handsome return dressed up as progress. It's a technical matter, Preston said. He handled most of. Evelyn turned on him with a look sharp enough to cut glass. Caroline saw it. That was the moment the marriage changed shape in front of everyone. Caroline was not looking at Maggie as a discarded woman anymore. She was looking at Preston like a bride who had just realized she had been placed in a contract she never read. You used my family's money for this? Caroline asked. Preston reached for her hand. She pulled it back. The room did not erupt. It tightened. People whispered into cuffs and leaned toward one another. One of the investors stood. He gathered his wife with a touch at her elbow and left without finishing his drink. Another followed. Then a third. Evelyn tried to recover. No one is withdrawing from anything tonight. Fiance sound. This is an emotional display by a young woman who has been hurt. Maggie looked at her then. For months, she had imagined what she would say if she ever had Evelyn trapped in the truth. Something sharp, something worthy of the wound. But standing there, with Ruth's signature under her hand, Maggie found she did not need to be cruel to be clear. You counted on that, she said. You counted on everyone thinking I was only hurt. Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. The lawyer collected the top page and handed a copy to Preston. There will be a formal review. Until then, any movement on the Whitaker property will be challenged. Preston took the paper as if it burned him. Dant finally leaned slightly toward Maggie. Ready? She looked once around the ballroom. At Preston, who had lost the room he had tried so hard to own. At Caroline, standing apart from him now, pale and furious. At Evelyn, whose manners could no longer hide the machinery beneath them. Then Maggie looked down at Ruth's name. Yes, she said. I'm ready. The review took time, but the wedding night had done what it needed to do. The investors backed away before the first formal hearing. The redevelopment plan stalled. Preston's firm distanced itself from the filing chain. The inquiry into the signature followed him longer than any honeymoon ever could have. Evelyn lost the one thing she had protected most fiercely, the right to tell Savannah who was respectable and who was not. He kept the shop. Some weeks later, a new sign was fitted above the front window. Ruth Whitaker Bridal Alterations. Painted fresh, the letters clean but familiar. Inside, he cleared the back room, where the old file boxes had been, and turned it into a private fitting space for women who came in nervous, apologizing for their arms, their hips, their age, fear the changes life had left on their bodies. Dante came by on the morning the sign went up. He stood on the sidewalk, with 2 coffees, and watched Maggie lock the front door open for the day. Looks right, he said. He glanced at the sign, then through the window at the mirror waiting inside. It does, she said. When the first bride arrived, Maggie took the pins from the counter and stepped toward the fitting room. They stayed outside a moment longer, not as a rescuer, not as a man claiming victory, but as the witness he had promised to be. And above them, Ruth's name held steady in the morning light.